All right, Scott, we are live, my friend. So today, guys, we have Scott Leese. I think it's great to just kick this off and let everyone know a little bit about who you are, why they should stick around and listen to this episode. Really excited to have you on today. So let's give everyone just a quick background of where you came from, what you've accomplished, so everyone knows exactly who they're listening to.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nick. My name's Scott Leese. Spent the better part of the last couple decades building and scaling sales teams for tech and SaaS companies all across the country. I was a VP of sales, head of sales, whatever you want to call it, a half dozen times. See, three of those companies had nine-figure exits, and one of them is kind of still going and is a multi-billion-dollar unicorn type company. So spent a lot of time kind of building things from scratch. Specific niche is like that 0 to 25 million sprint at the very beginning.
Mm.
Started building my brand on LinkedIn about 8 years ago. Wrote a couple sales books, have run multiple sales communities like the Surf and Sales community and the Surf and Sales Summit is a sales conference in Costa Rica I host a couple times a year. Ran this community called Thursday Night Sales for 3 years during the pandemic. That became the world's largest virtual sales happy hour. Do a bunch of private coaching with VPs of sales and fractionals and stuff like that. So got my hands in a lot of different cookie jars, so to speak. Also
Yeah.
run a venture firm with my brother called Milos Ventures. So yeah, to keep myself busy.
You're definitely staying busy. How did you start? Like, what led you to take this sort of career path? Did you have entrepreneurs in the family? What made you get into the sales side of things specifically, that whole go-to-market strategy? How did you get going?
Yeah. So none of that stuff that you just mentioned. No entrepreneurs in the family. My parents were not in business at all. My mom was a part-time nurse, and my dad was a professor at Chico State University in Northern California. So I didn't have any model for business or sales or making money or any of that kind of stuff. I studied psychology and religion in college. So, and I was in San Francisco where I went to school, and the .com stuff was happening all around me, and I was oblivious to it. I don't know how, but I was completely oblivious to it. Went to grad school after college, and then unfortunately developed a really serious health issue and proceeded to spend the next 4 years in the hospital.
Wow.
Yeah, fighting for my life. Had a couple autoimmune diseases, colon cancer scare. Had nine major surgeries, four life-saving emergency abdominal surgeries. Yeah, I have no large intestine anymore. I've been through the ringer
Wow.
many times over. Got hooked on opioids while I was in the hospital, so I eventually had to kick off dope once I was healthy enough from all my illness stuff. So cut fast forward a little bit. I'm 7 years old, and I've never had a job in my life that didn't involve playing sports or coaching sports. So I didn't know what to do. And I had a college tennis teammate who had been in sales for a few years while I was sick and was making pretty good money. And he kind of suggested that I take a look at sales as a potential career path. Don't need experience, you don't need a degree, go to an early startup and just like figure it out, was basically his advice.
Yeah.
And so, I thought, well, I'm a pretty competitive person. I played two sports in college for 4 years. I've got some leadership skills. So if I can get good at something, maybe I can move into, a management role or whatever. So that was it, man. I understood, like, if you perform well, you get paid. And if you don't perform well, you get fired or cut. Basically, I was looking at it like an athlete would look at it.
Yeah.
And so that was it. I gave it a shot. I found an early stage, super brand new startup company in San Francisco Bay Area. And yeah, that was how my sales career began.
Yeah, that's definitely quite the journey. It sounds like there's an inspirational story there for sure. You've been through a lot between the health stuff, the openness of being hooked on opioids is absolutely no joke. If anyone has ever been around that, it's one of the most difficult things you could do. To then having this sort of career that you've had, that's inspirational to anyone that's listening to this. And I think that just hearing that, people could say, or they could know, there's proof that if you've been through that and you can get to where you're at now, people that feel like they have no option absolutely have a path forward. And so there's also a difference between finding your way into that career path, learning how to be successful in sales, and then jumping into the entrepreneurship side of things, right? And so how did you finally decide after you got your career going, you realized that you had a path forward, your skill sets were starting to shine, maybe you started to enjoy certain things over others as you started to get started. When did you decide I'm going to just do this on my own? I'm going to start consulting. How were you confident enough to take that leap? I think this is a big thing that holds people back.
Yeah, it took me a long time. I was not somebody who wanted to take like a huge financial risk after everything that I had been through. I also had a lot of imposter syndrome going on as far as being an entrepreneur. I always looked at CEOs and founders and VCs as people who must be like 100 times smarter than me and 100 times more successful and stuff like that. But the longer I was working and the more experience I got, I realized these fucking people don't know any more than me, really. And then in many cases, as I got older, they know less than me about go to market and things
Yeah.
like that. And so it was about my fourth VP of sales gig where, I kind of had taken the red pill, so to speak, and was like, okay, this game is rigged. I can do as good as I want, and they can get rid of me at any point in time, or they can hire somebody above me who's more senior. I had it. We had an exit and sold this company for a couple $100 million, and the founders walk away with like 30-40 million bucks a piece, and I made like 400 grand. And I'm like, okay, I understand that they deserve more, but like that much more, that disparity, like, come on, man.
Yeah.
And so I started thinking like I need to diversify my income stream here. I need to stop pouring my heart and soul into one opportunity and start spreading the wealth around and start building a few things for myself. So I started kind of preparing to one day leave. So I did stuff like started building my brand earlier than a lot of people. I wrote a sales book that did really well. And
Hmm.
it's called Addicted to the Process, kind of about my story and my journey and how I got into sales. And that kind of propelled me forward. And I started getting coaching inquiries and consulting inquiries and stuff like that. And then I put this sales conference together. And so, but it wasn't until 2019 that I fully decided to cut the cord and go all in on myself. And I waited until the income that I was earning from all of my work on the side was the same as what I was earning from my W 2.
Yeah.
So I didn't leave full time as a solopreneur type person until I was making like 400 grand on the side, matching my 400K from being a VP of sales. I played it like fairly safe, in that regard. But once I got to that level, I said, I'm out. I'd been a VP 6 times. I had lots of successful, moments. And the job that I was leaving was the most successful stint that I had ever had. And I thought, when and if this thing exits, I'm going to get a nice windfall. I don't think I need to do this anymore. I was 42 years old at the time. And I'm like, I don't really want to work for a 23-year-old Stanford grad again, you know? So time to move on and do my
I
own
don't,
thing.
yeah, and I don't blame you there. It's interesting. So I'm going through that exact thing now where my income, except for a little bit different, I reached a certain level of income, multi six figure, 50,000, and I quit my job and we launched this startup. And the biggest barrier for me is I had just had a baby 9 months ago. He's 9 months old, and I'm married. And the biggest fear is like I have a phenomenal career. I don't
Yeah.
ever have to worry about anything from a financial standpoint. I don't drive a Porsche. I don't, it's just, that's just not me. I lay very low in material goods. Not that there's anything wrong with having nice things. There's no reason for me to take any sort of leap again because I had done this in the past. I had a brick and mortar business for a couple years, and my family was definitely a little bit worried about it. But we just cut the ripcord and decided to go all in. And it's
Mhm.
interesting because the first couple months, you start to have a little bit of that anxiety, at least in my experience, and things work out. And you mentioned imposter syndrome. It's like, well, can I do this on my own again? when you don't have support, you can feel a little bit alone at first. But as soon as business starts to come in and you're using your network and you're starting to close deals and clients are having wins, it feels really good. And I don't think that there's anything that I could ever replace again to go back to what I was doing prior. That's just me. The joy that I get from knowing that something that I'm creating is impacting business owners and their families is the most profound experience that I've ever had in my life.
Good for you, man. Yeah, really good for you.
I
So
appreciate that.
you had a certain level of confidence and guts that I did not have. If you went from down to zero and build something from scratch, this just goes to show that there's no one way, and it's kind of a personal choice and decision, and either way can work out.
It can work out, and if it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world. It moves
That's the
on.
thing. That's the thing that people need to remember. You know, if you can anchor yourself in what's the worst thing that could possibly happen, and if you pause and reflect upon that, all of us have probably been through something really traumatic,
Yeah,
painful, life-threatening, whatever you want to call it. Like all of us have been through hell of some sort. And if you can anchor whatever your work and professional life struggles and difficulties are in whatever that hardest thing you've ever been through is, the work stuff kind of pales in comparison. It's
absolutely.
like I was in the hospital for 4 years. You think I fucking care if I miss my quota? You think I care
No.
if you're going to fire me? Whatever, dude, I'll find another job, So even when I finally decided to go out on my own, I was like, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? I fail. I have to go get another VP of sales job. Like, oh, well,
Yeah, who
no big
cares?
deal.
And
Right.
everyone thinks that you won't find the job that replaced the one that you had. And I think that there's some guys, if you're a sales rep and you think you know everything and you're always complaining, the grass is not always greener. You might go somewhere else and regret your decision. And I see that a lot personally with friends of mine that have had jobs that earned even much more than me and they left because they thought that there was somewhere better and there wasn't. But the reality is, there are other careers out there. There's other jobs that you can get that are going to be able to provide the same thing as long as you're applying your skill. You can't rely on the company. You have to understand that the opportunity is paramount, but so is your ability to work through that to generate that income again. So if it doesn't work out, it's okay. And I've actually never shared this publicly. My friends and family know about this, but for no reason. I wasn't hiding it, but I just never shared it. But your story is making me want to just bring it up. When I was about 21, I was diagnosed with a panic disorder where like my blood pressure would drop from my heart just rapidly starting to palpitate. I would go into a panic and then it would drop and I would essentially pass out. And this is like a 20-minute
Man.
stint. I would start like profusely sweating and I'd slowly start blacking out. And I went to the doctor for a few years and they were telling me, it was a panic disorder. And a few times it almost killed me because of how severe it was. And there was a moment where at the time I was still in college, it was my senior year, and a friend of mine, I was having one of these panic attacks, and he brought me a Gatorade, and I drank it, and I felt better. And it was just a weird thing. I just thought it had passed. Fast forward to I think maybe 25, 26, this is 5 or 6 years later. The more that this happened, and I associated eating with feeling better, I was then told from doctors that it was psychological. If I ate something or if I had a Gatorade or something with sugar, that, that was just a coping mechanism. Keep doing that. And I thought it was really peculiar. And this is not a dissing doctor story. This is a connecting with my mortality story. It winds up I was misdiagnosed for over 5 years with something called reactive hypoglycemia. So if I were to, at baseline, eat high sugar or high carb foods, my insulin levels get so high that the blood sugar just gets removed rather than spiking. And so I was going into like very severe hypoglycemic states
Wow.
and I was using breathing techniques and Lexapro and shit like that to try to feel better and it wouldn't work and a few times it almost killed me. And so
Wow.
every time I'm in a situation that's stressful and I'm going to take a leap with business or I'm going to invest in something or whatever the case, whatever it is that I'm doing, I always think about the moments where I felt like if I could have anything other than another 5 minutes with the people I love, I'd be happy. it completely erases any of the anxieties that I've ever had about money, about performance, about hitting KPIs, about anything that's honestly pretty useless in the grand scheme of things. And this is a business podcast, and we're going to dive into some stuff in a little bit, but I think the psychological conversation or the psychology, the things we're discussing is actually really important for account executives, business coaches. If you're an entrepreneur, these things matter because they affect how you look at things and how you make decisions. And that's something that for me, not everyone's had that experience or your experience, but like you said, similar experiences where anytime things like this happen, you have to sit and just take a breath and reflect on what's important. All this other stuff that we have and that that goes on in our lives, it's okay. Like it can be
Yeah,
fixed.
appreciate you sharing that. And
Yeah.
when you go through things like that, some people unfortunately get stuck and use it as an excuse or a crutch or a reason, you know, not to succeed, for lack of a better expression. And other people turn that experience into a superpower,
Yeah.
and that's what you need to do. You need to mobilize whatever you've been through and turn it into a superpower. Like, I didn't know that story. You said you never shared it publicly. I think it's
Mm-mm.
important, as each person's comfort level with their own vulnerability is unique. But I think the more people who tell stories about things that they've been through, like myself or like you just shared, it normalizes it a little bit, and it lets people know, like, well, shit, I've been through some things too, and these guys made it out the other side, right? And going
Yep.
through those things and kind of weaponizing it in your favor is very liberating, you know, very freeing. You don't have as much to fear. Everything is put in a different type of perspective. You also have a different kind of respect for each and every opportunity that you have put in front of you, because you know how limited they are, you know how rare
Mm.
they are. You want to make the most of them. You end up having a certain sense of urgency that maybe is lacking in other people. These things are all superpowers in the business world,
Yep.
right? And they didn't come from a business degree or even work experience. It came from life experience, and we use those lessons to serve us in the business arena.
Oh, it's definitely true. And I hope everyone can tap into that. It's important. I want to dig into go to market if you're cool with that. I always compare go to market to the fitness industry or health and fitness. If you speak to one person, they're going to tell you
Yeah.
carnivore diet, veganism, like whatever, right? It's just I feel like go to market is just like that where everybody has these draw the line in the sand opinions about how to go to market, especially in the B2B SaaS world. And at least in my opinion, I do think that there's a little bit of versatility. There's some gray, there's a place to meet in the middle. I don't think one way to deploy a strategy for a B2B startup that's maybe in tech is the same as a biotech company that's developing something for pharmaceuticals. I do think it varies personally, but I want to talk a little bit about how you see this and what methods do you use to validate a go-to-market strategy? What are you seeing out there today? What's your take?
Well, I don't know how anybody could argue that there's a lot of different methodologies that work, because there's a lot of people who've succeeded and everybody does things a little bit differently. I don't think that it's smart, for example, to only use cold calling. I don't think it's smart to only use cold emailing. I think you have to use all these different strategies and the old multi-channel approach that everybody talks about. I think it's foolish to think that selling the way you did 20 years ago is going to give you the same results as selling today will, with that same style and strategy. So whatever you've learned and had success with is great, but you also better keep learning and you better keep evolving, or you're going to make yourself irrelevant. And so you've got to be continuously trying to find, like, what's the newest, latest, greatest, thing, tip, trick, or whatever. I will say that I've never seen a sales organization succeed that didn't have some type of core underlying philosophy, methodology, strategy, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't work when you got 10 people in the sales org and all 10 of them are doing things completely differently.
differently,
Yeah, that doesn't work.
which
Whatever that,
happens.
yeah, it happens all the time. So whatever that core philosophy is, yeah, there could be differences there.
I always see that as like
But there
a
better be something.
it has to be something. There's too many organizations that I've worked with that they want to hire people that like eat what they kill and just have the skill set, and they're dumping off their responsibility as a leader to, and they're maybe they haven't even sat in the sales role for a few years at this point, right? Like maybe they had a staff and there's high turnover and they just keep hiring people, and it's like we need someone that can get it done. We need someone that knows how to get out there and do it. But they just can't put in the time to map out any sort of method or process that worked for them as the founder when it was all about founder-led growth in the first maybe 12 to 15 months or even 36 months. They dump this off and they have no way of mapping out a clear path to success. And I never understood why that is so common, but I see after someone hits maybe 5 million in net new ARR, they're trying to grow their sales team. They just hire a bunch of people. They're like, listen, if you can sell, you can sell anything. And they put them in the seat and then bad things happen. I see,
Yeah.
at least I see this all the time, me personally.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of examples of that. There's the founders who over-index for industry expertise. And then I think that just because somebody has a background in, I don't know, the mortgage business, they'll be able to sell a particular product. And
Hmm.
they don't optimize for sales acumen or sort of stage appropriate hires. Like I deal with this all the time with my clients. Is some startup will have hired like a, you know, executive from Oracle or IBM or something like that to be their early stage VP of sales, and it doesn't work. And I'm like, well, of course it didn't work. He just pulled somebody from this like mega core and dumped them in the mud of this brand new early stage startup. Like these are not the same skill sets,
Yeah.
right? And it surprises me that people keep making some of these mistakes because there's never been more access to information and advice and guidance and coaching and whatever you want to call it than right now.
And
You know,
you
it
mentioned
seems
something
so obvious to avoid some of these mistakes.
I would agree. And you mentioned something earlier about always having to adapt, leading into what you just mentioned now.
Yeah.
I think we have some of the smartest buyers that we've ever had because of access to information. Back in the early 90s, as an example, when the internet wasn't so relevant, you had to lean and rely on experts to give you information to help you make a decision. Nowadays, people are always going to go in and do their own research before they, not always, but most of the time, they're going to do their research. They're going to start to understand what it is that they need or want or educate themselves on a product so they can have a conversation on it. And that drastically changes the tactic or the method behind how you're going to deliver the product to the consumer. I think both from a marketing standpoint and for your sales team.
Yeah. I was just talking about this yesterday afternoon, actually. I completely agree with you. People were asking the question of, you know, how are you setting up your CRM and your stages? And is it mapping like a sales process or is it mapping the buyer's process?
Yeah.
And this was the discussion amongst a few VPs of sales. And ultimately, the group was like, well, it used to be mapped to the sales process, and now it's mapped to the buying process. And the reason for that is exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
The buyers are in more control than ever before, and they
That's right.
need sellers even less, and they have access to more information. And most of the time, they've already become aware of this challenge or problem they've had. They've gone reading and researching about different solutions, and sometimes by the time they come to you, they're 75% of the way, you know, towards making the decision already, right? Very different than how it was 20 something years ago when I first started. Yeah,
It's not even close. Are you familiar with David Spitz?
I don't think so.
So David Spitz, I came across him when I was going through a book called Revenue Architecture. I don't know if you're familiar with that book.
I don't know.
Jocko Vanderkoy wrote it. It just came out this year, and I didn't know the name until I read the book. And in the book, they talk about in 2015, this is just an example of what we're talking about here. You could rely on 100 cold emails to generate a qualified opportunity within your ICP. Now, fast forward to 2023, it's 1,000 plus touches okay, from various sources, text, email, events, whatever the case is, to generate that same qualified opportunity. And when you look at not just that amount of inundation that has caused that effect where we're just constantly inundated by messages, spam, people calling, the whole landscape has changed. A lot has contributed to why it went from 100 cold emails to over 1,000 touches to get a qualified opportunity, right? There's a lot of reasons on why that happened, but when you compound, let's say an SDR back in 2015, baseline maybe 35K plus bonuses, you might be looking at 50K fully loaded for an SDR or a BDR. Now you're looking close to six figures just for that person. And then your account executives are going to be multi six figure if they're good as well. One of the things that we're seeing is as a result of what you're talking about, given the data that David Spitz put together with Bench Sites as his company, I see a lot of people, if that information's accurate, and I feel like it is, and I don't know because I'm not the one that put it together, but I feel like in my experience, that data feels accurate. I see teams overhiring in the belief that the more salespeople that they hire, it's going to equate to more deals. And given that people need less sales reps more than ever before, not that they don't need them, but hiring 10 people versus five doesn't mean you're going to double the amount of sales. And so now we're looking at more touches to generate a qualified opportunity, higher payroll. Your go-to-market bloat is going to be one of the biggest things holding you back from, having a profitable company. But for some reason, given all the tech companies that are making this mistake over and over and over again, they continue to do this. They continue to just hire 10 salespeople when they feel like they're in hyper growth mode. Like it's the growth at all costs era back in 2012. Like things have changed so much from that time period. And when I looked at this data when it came out, I was like, man, like I speculated this, but somebody actually put it together with accurate like data points, and it blew my mind. So it's an interesting thing to look at. I've been following his stuff pretty closely because he brings something to the table that I just don't, which is access to that sort of information. And I think it's relevant to what we're talking about because I see no one making at least publicly, like these big companies, Dropbox, like people that are in a very dangerous spot with how they're growing their business. How are they going to be able to turn it around? How are they going to be able to increase the valuation? I don't know.
Yeah.
What needs to change when we see things like this happening?
Well,
And
I
I'm
think
going,
it is changing. I mean, the first place stuff starts to change is the very early stage, the earliest stage kind of companies, and you pay attention to different funding trends and stuff like that. And that's the arena where I play. So this growth at all cost thing that you've been talking about, that has really stopped since mid 2022, I think. I don't run into that very much anymore. Run into people being very hesitant to hire anybody on the sales side. And you can see the market trying to find solutions to this as they push AI everything all over us all the time. And
makes sense.
if you pay attention closely to what, the founders of some of these AI companies say, or the venture capital folks and what they say, they don't hide the fact that they are building products that are not in humanity's best interests. And they don't hide the fact that they would love one day for scottandnick.com to be a two-person billion-dollar plus unicorn company,
Yeah.
because there's no expenses at that point in time. It's just like pure profit margin in their mind. And they think that we can automate out, damn near everything. So that's the current like overcorrection to this growth at all costs kind of model. They're like, well, how can we get rid of SDRs? That question seems laughable to some people, but then you dig in and you realize there are a ton of early stage startups right now, and a megacore in Salesforce who has put out products that are an automated SDR. And the tech is not like quite good enough yet.
Yeah, I know.
But how long is that going to last before the tech is good enough? There's all sorts of tech out there for content creation, write better emails, all this kind of stuff, right? Go to Chat GPT and say, write me a prospecting email to Nick to get me on this podcast. It's probably 60 to 70% like good enough. And
Right.
I have to
Yeah.
run kind of the last mile right now. For how much longer? we're all feeding the algorithm so much information on
Yeah.
every site that we're on. How much longer am I going to have to run the last mile? So that this whole trend towards all of this automated stuff is sort of sucking the humanity out of the sales process, and that will probably work for a little while.
Hmm.
And then what will happen is, as it always does, the market will recorrect itself, because when every message I get and every email that I get, my immediate reaction is, oh, this fucking bot wrote this AI thing. That's not Nick writing me a message.
Did you think my message was automated out of
I don't remember.
curiosity?
I don't remember, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
So
But
anyone listening, I actually reached out to Scott. I sent him a message. So
was it automated?
no, it wasn't. It wasn't. So
Well, there
I
you
get
go.
the profile views, and I saw that Scott came across my profile. I can't recall how, and I just sent you a message, said, "Hey, I've got a podcast. I saw that you
Okay.
landed on my profile." And I said something about surfing, because I saw that you're a surfer, and it must have at least clicked to some degree. And we chatted for a moment, and you're kind enough to come on. But I try my best to make sure that I don't lean on the automated messages. And this is just my bias, 100%. Nothing pisses me off more when I wake up every day and I have to go through 8 different automated
Yeah.
messages that sound exactly the same. It's fake personalization. I mean, I just can't
Yeah.
even stand it. So
Right.
I
So
won't do it.
when we get to a place where we distrust every single message in our inbox, distrust the authenticity of all of it, what are we going to do? Because I think at that point in time, the only way to sort of prove yourself as genuine and authentic is to do all sorts of stuff that don't scale. And we're going to go way back to the beginning. And how do you sort of prove to somebody that you're real? Well, you have to get in front of them. So there's going to be a massive face-to-face revolution coming back. The
That's an
only way you
interesting
know
take.
that I'm not a bot or an AI, whatever, is if I look you in the eye. I sit across the, dinner table from you, or I have drinks with you, or through peer-to-peer recommendations and relationships, which is this whole network, which
Yeah.
is part of the reason why so many people are investing so heavily on building a brand and building and growing the size of their network. Because if you and I are friends and I want to get a hold of person X over here, and I know that you're friends with person X, well, I'm going to go to you and say, hey, person X, I would love to talk to them about this thing that I'm doing. Do you mind making an introduction? And the only way that that person X is taking that, you know, intro is because they trust you. If I try to cold call that person, they're not going to pick up for much longer. We already know that all the pickup rates are tanking. They're
I
also
think
not going to respond to email
it's
from a
horrible.
stranger much longer. Those are tanking. What they will do is they'll trust the people that they know. And I think we're going to, have to over index back to that at some point in time real quick. And I have a lot of clients that are succeeding with this type of go to network rather than go to market type of approach right now.
I've never thought about it like that. The overcorrection of authenticating yourself, doing things that are no longer scalable, so to speak, and having to go in person or go to network. I'm going to be thinking a lot about that now because I can see, as you mentioned it, that that is definitely a possibility. I am also happy to hear that you think that the growth to all cost strategies are kind of done as of 2022. I haven't worked with that sort of startup, but this is just what I saw over the past couple of years, and it's good because that was something that I experienced as a rep. I
Yeah.
worked in those companies for the past 8 years, and that was frustrating. So it's good that that's starting to correct itself. But now on the AI front, which I use AI tools not for outreach or messaging because it personally irritates me, but it's a really interesting thought that you bring up. So that's pretty cool to think about. I'm gonna have to start figuring out how I can go to network. My LinkedIn is something like that. That's how we got you here, and I've definitely had business from LinkedIn and just working with my network and getting referrals that way. But I am not enjoying the way that that platform is changing. I think it's
Yeah.
starting to
Yeah.
become like another spammy social network. So hopefully that can correct itself because it has the power, in my opinion, but it's not moving in the right direction, I don't think.
Yeah. I wouldn't bank on it correcting itself.
Yeah. That's probably a good thing not to bank on. So, well, they're pretending to be a social network. LinkedIn is a B2B platform pretending to be a social network. They've got the beta now with the vertical reels to see how people can get caught up into that. Their algorithm's an absolute nightmare. It's not serving anyone. I think their efforts are just in the wrong place if they just refocus themselves on trying to help more business owners connect with more business owners. They would have more success. It's an oversimplification. I'm not on their team. I don't really know, but that's my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a good opportunity for somebody to build the next version of LinkedIn
Yeah.
and reset the market, so to speak. Build a better mousetrap. I think there's a
We're
lot of people who share your sentiment,
yeah.
and yeah,
We're
could be
leaning on
interesting.
you, Scott. We're leaning on you.
I think that's too much work for me
Yeah,
at
it,
this
it
point in
definitely
time.
would be a lot of work.
I'm willing to help somebody, but I don't know if I want to build the whole thing myself.
Yeah, certainly be a big project. Did you see this is another thing? There's 1,000 companies out there. There was a lot of controversy about a report that came out from the company Hockey Stack. Are you familiar with them?
I know Hockey Stack. I don't know this controversy you're about to
So
spill.
I've always liked them as a business. I've never worked with them, but I know some people that work over there. They came out with a study or their white paper report, their annual report that said that it takes over like 250 touches before somebody decides that they want to be a client. And LinkedIn basically lit a fire over that, saying it's, bad data. It's not a good study. There's a lot of flaws. And how could you possibly ever know that? Like attribution doesn't tell you the entire story. It could have been 1,000 touches. It could have been the first time somebody came across it. So you said earlier you're someone that doesn't mind shaking things up a little bit and pissing people off a little bit. So I was curious to if you have any thoughts about the future of Outbound and does it take a certain amount of touches and do you think that that's accurate? I was just curious your thoughts around some of the stuff that came out
Yeah,
from that.
I think the future of Outbound is very bleak, is what I think. We, I'm 47 years old. I grew up in a world where the phone and telephone calls was like an event of some sort. Like, if the phone rang in my house, I was sprinting to the phone because I didn't want my parents to answer it to like embarrass me to my friends or my girlfriend or whatever. But we couldn't leave the house because my mom was expecting a phone call from somebody. It's an event. It's a thing, right?
Yeah.
Now we are bombarded by such a ton of volume of bullshit and spam that our ringers are off 24/7. So even if I wanted you to call me, I won't even know that you called me because I won't hear it, right? And there's telemarketers everywhere. We've got caller ID. If you get called by a number that you don't recognize that's not already added in your contacts, most people don't answer the phone.
Hmm.
So then you think about, well, what about the younger generation right now, right? Well, my kids are teenagers. I don't know if you hang out with any teenagers at all. You got cousins, nephews, nieces,
Yeah.
whatever. They do not talk on the telephone
No.
at all. This is a behavioral change, generational behavioral change. So it is impossible for me to imagine a world 5, 10 years from now when they are in, sales jobs, business jobs, VP jobs, founder job, whatever, right? You think my kids are going to cold call people? No way.
Yeah.
Do you think that they would look at a job where that's what you're supposed to do is like enticing to them? They don't even socialize the way that we did.
No.
They don't hang out. They don't go somewhere after school together. Their faces are buried in their phones all day long.
Hmm.
So they're used to what we would consider as old people isolation.
Yeah.
Absolutely would terrify them to pick up the phone and cold call strangers and disrupt them. They also tell me all the time that email is, quote, for old people. And the only reason I use email is because my teachers use email. Well, think about your email inbox. If you don't check your email for the next 24 hours, how many messages do you have?
100. Literally at least.
100. How many
Yeah.
Slack notifications if you have Slack?
50.
And how many LinkedIn notifications? You see where I'm going with
Oh, it's
this.
insane.
We're
Yeah.
bombarded by notifications all day long,
Hmm.
right? And of those 100 emails, maybe 10% at best are actually like relevant, right? There's a bunch of people trying to sell you stuff. There's a bunch of spam. There's a bunch of newsletters or advertisement things that you signed up for that you don't remember ever signing up for that you're trying to unsubscribe from, right? It's chaos. So we've built all these products to triage our inbox and filter things out before they ever get to us. And then all of the AI stuff that we were just talking about, there's going to be all these automated messages. I'm not going to trust an email from anybody. So how can I imagine a future 5, 10 years from now where this switches around and suddenly cold calls are popular again and cold email is popular again? The only people it's popular with still are people of my age who grew up this way and had success this way and still believe this because they don't know any other way and they don't want to reimagine what the future looks like and they don't want to learn something new. So you asked me about the future of outbound. I think the future of outbound is fucked, to be perfectly honest with you.
I'm happy that
I
somebody
think,
else.
yeah. I've been saying this for almost 2 years and I have a lot of haters and I get a lot of, messages and people telling me I'm stupid or I must be trying to sell something. And I'm like, listen, this future that I'm talking about, it fucking makes my life harder. It makes my job harder. I have to reinvent myself. If everything stayed the way it was the last 20 years, I wouldn't have to do anything. I already know everything that worked the last 20 years. I'm not incentivized for this future to show up. I'm just telling you, this is how I see it. This is where I see it heading. And so this go to network kind of approach to me is the only way that we're going to be able to open up new opportunities in the future. I'm going to have to know somebody who knows the person that I want to talk to. And I'm going to have to incentivize you to make that introduction because people are done doing things out of the kindness of their heart and opening up their network. People know now that their network is valuable, very valuable, right? And so you have to find ways to compensate them. And it's a cheaper avenue than paying SDRs to open up opportunities. Mm-hmm. It's not scary for the salesperson. It's not annoying for the prospect and the buyer. They're hearing from somebody that they know, mm-hmm. you, and you're just saying, hey, I don't know if you have this problem, but my buddy Scott is working on it. I can vouch for him that he's a good dude. It's worth your time. No pressure. Don't take the meeting if you don't want it. But if you do want to learn more about it, I'm happy to make the intro. That person now has a choice. They can opt in or not. Right. So I see and have been teaching companies how to sort of do this in a scalable type of fashion for the last couple of years. And this is like the only thing that I see working 100% of the time.
Wow.
And that to me is the future of prospecting. And so I've been telling people for a while now, if you don't have a network, how can you even run this go-to-network play moving forward? You can't.
Yeah, you can't. Right.
So you better start building a network and you better start incorporating this type of motion as part of your current go-to-market strategy. I'm not saying stop making phone calls or stop sending emails. Those still work. But I just don't think they're going to work much longer.
And that's the data that David Spitz had put out is exactly in line with that. It just historically has gotten harder and harder and harder and harder. And to your point, I think it's just going to get worse and worse. And I didn't come to the realization as soon as you had. You said about 2 years ago you started talking about this. I only started talking about this within the last 6 months. And I was known for a while as the outbound guy. And I had plenty of roles where I was fed leads, appointments were booked for me, but I always made twice the amount as anyone else on the team, almost always, because I would call people, I would send emails, I would buy a bottle of Blanton's, and I'd not use a machine. I'd actually handwrite a note that looked like shit because my handwriting's horrible and it possibly couldn't have been a machine, and I would send it to them. And I would do things that other people just didn't do from nothing fancy, just a little bit more work, right? I would be very personal. I would make sure they knew something was coming, and I would do a lot of outbound, and I would generate a lot of sales. And in the past 6 months or so, before I took a leap into this new venture, everything that I had done, it's not that it didn't work sometimes, but the return on effort, right? The amount of time that I could have placed somewhere else doing something differently, it didn't make sense for me to do outbound anymore. And the more I started to network and call people that I have friends that are entrepreneurs or they've been in business for 10 years, they'd said, Nick, dude, we've been experiencing this for 3 years. You're
Mm.
lucky that your well didn't run dry up until this point. And this is where I started to dig further and further into it. And I put a post out on LinkedIn and a couple other platforms a few weeks ago. And I said, I'm ready for the hate mail, but outbound is dead. And that's, again, it's a draw the line in the sand sort of statement. I agree with you. Nothing wrong with making memories and keeping you top of mind with a few emails every once in a while or calling someone that maybe was interested and fell off or whatever the case is. It's all good to do that, but the reliance on these strategies is no longer effective. And so, where are you going to put the time and energy with your team? That's not a solution that I've come up with. And so, I think it's really interesting that you have this go to network strategy. I would love to see how that continues to work for you because that sounds like it's
It's
definitely the way to go.
it's so much easier than you can possibly imagine. So, traditionally people raise venture capital money and they get their first customers through their VCs.
Mm-hmm.
They know, like, hey, who do you guys know that might be good buyers for this? Right? It's referrals. And then all of a sudden we stop asking. We stop asking the VCs because we already asked once, and we don't ask any other people. Why don't we ask everybody on the team? I know somebody who had engineers on the team who knew multiple prospects because they happened to go to college with them. And that opened up $500,000 and $1 million a pipeline right there. What about your advisors or consultants that you work with? What about LinkedIn influencers who have massive networks, depending on who you sell to? So for me, for example, I have 115,000 plus followers on LinkedIn. Most of them are B2B tech founders, CEOs, sales leaders, stuff like that. So if you sell to any of those buyer personas in tech and SaaS, I'm a perfect referral partner because I probably know a good chunk of people. So if you put together a list of prospects that you want to get a hold of, and you are only sending me like first degree connections of mine, all right? I probably know like 5% good enough that I could text them right now and be like, yo, I don't know if you have this problem or not, but my buddy Nick would love to talk to you. Take the meeting, don't take the meeting. I don't care. What do you want to do? About 80% of them say, yeah, sure, I'll take the meeting. So let's say you have a $50,000 average contract value. Well, based on my math, I can open up $200,000 of pipeline for you today, right now. That's 4 new meetings booked in one day. Show me an SDR who can book 4 meetings for you, emailing, cold calling right now today, 4 meetings in one day. I don't think you can.
Yeah,
The,
without
mis-
trying to offer something silly, right? Where people are trying to hop on meetings for no reason, which
the,
is the majority of that strategy nowadays.
the mistake that people make even with this is they sign up one of me and they think, well, that's good. That's the way to do it. You need to sign up 100 versions of me
Yeah.
because now you don't have $200,000 of pipeline. You have 20 fucking million in pipeline. Then the mistake people make is they asked all these influencers one time and they don't have a repeatable system. What you should do is put a new list in front of people like me every couple weeks. And so there's a steady cadence, and you're not being passive and reactive, waiting for me to refer you people. You're pushing your prospects in a short little list, 50 to 100 people at a time, to me and 100 other versions of me, just saying, hey, do you know any of these people right here? Do you know any of these people right here? Think about the volume of pipeline that is producible through this play. It dwarfs whatever your pipeline is right now. And all you have to do to get people to participate is pay them, is incentivize them.
Mm-hmm.
The average right now is somewhere between 10 and 20%. Okay. Now, if you have an average deal size of $1,000
Yeah, it
for the
doesn't make
year,
sense.
senior level people don't care about $100. All right. But if you've got a $50,000 average contract value, and I can make an intro on your behalf, you're telling me I can make 5 grand just by introducing you to somebody if the deal closes? Well, you got my attention now. And if you got a $500,000 ACV and I might make 50 grand on this deal, I will jump through hoops and you can keep sending me those lists as often as you want.
That's right.
I've been making thousands of dollars a month on this for 2+ years, not as a startup founder, but as a side stream of income as a consultant. Because I have vendors coming to me saying, "Hey, who do you know, Scott?" And I'm just connecting people all over the place.
So,
And then I've been teaching and installing this motion with all of my clients over the last couple of years. So
mm,
they're doing it. They're juicing their pipeline. So think about it being an early stage startup, like a seed stage or Series A startup. You got two choices to go to market. You can take your nerdy founder who doesn't know anything about sales, who doesn't have the acumen or the interest, and you can force them to cold email and cold call and try to drum up business. Or you can teach them to network with the right people, and the right people will make introductions on your behalf and book all these meetings for you. Which way gets you to the right pipeline and revenue number faster? Which way is less painless for all parties involved? The answer is pretty obvious to me.
yeah, it's definitely obvious when you put it that way. And you can do it while running a leaner team.
You don't have to hire any. You don't have to hire anybody.
No one. Yeah.
No one. Yeah. You're not
Solves
paying
a lot of
my. You're
problems.
not paying my taxes. You're not paying my health insurance. You're not paying for a laptop for me. You're not paying for office space for me. Right? No base salary. No commissions. You'd gladly pay 10% of your margin to a referral partner like that. Right?
So your network
It's
becomes your
so
sales force.
simple. That's it. That's exactly right.
Yeah, that is amazing. Now, is this something that as you started to progress in your career as a consultant, you realized this opportunity, or did you actually try to solve the problem? How did you come across this being so
No,
powerful?
dumb luck, dumb luck. Me just just growing the size of my network and therefore influence. And companies would ask on a one-off kind of basis, like, "Hey Scott, do you know this guy Nick?" When they'd ask on a one-off basis, 99% of the time, like, "No, sorry, I don't know who that is. You're asking me one person's name." Right? But a couple times, people would send me, I don't know, 5 or 10 names at once, and I'd be like, "Oh, I know one or two of these people,"
Yeah.
and I made a couple of introductions, and then people after you make an introduction or two would say, "Hey, we have this referral program. If you ever want to send people our way." And so I started kind of dabbling, and I realized, well, these vendors are just like very passive with this thing. And so I started telling them, if you really want me to help you, here's what I need you to do. And it's, just kind of trial and error. I never really did any of this stuff when I was the VP of sales. Cold outbound and cold calling and emailing, it wasn't a problem back then.
Yeah,
So,
no.
I just kind of stumbled over it and ran the motion myself, and then started telling everybody I work with, "You guys need to do this."
Yeah, it sounds like an incredible strategy. Everything you're saying adds up, and my gears are turning as you're telling me this. Like, man, I personally need to do a better job of doing stuff like that. And even for people that do have sales teams, I do think it's interesting that sales reps don't even ask for referrals. It's pretty non-existent. I haven't come across a team recently where everyone on the team is consistently asking for business or asking if they know, another company that's in the
Yeah.
same area, whatever. It just doesn't happen. So
Well, it's
similar
harder. It's
principle.
it's harder than ever to stand out. So you better do something that other people are not.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a term that I've been using. It's the sea of sameness. It comes down to everything, the strategies, even the way content looks. Everybody is just in this hyper replication mode, and it just feels the same. And so when I see the same things, at least I know myself because I'm bombarded every day with people reaching out, and just like, I'm not special in that category. The only time that I even get remotely interested is if it genuinely feels different or unique, or there is a connection being made. But I've got one other thing that I want to run through here, and then maybe we can wrap it up for the day. I had a note here on RevOps, simple stuff. I wanted to ask you with the experience that you've had right now, all the stuff we've talked about. I don't know if any of it translates, but what are three of the most common mistakes you're seeing right now in RevOps? Because RevOps can be a nightmare.
Mm. Well, the first one would be not investing in it soon enough. And the second one would be expecting your VP of sales to be your head of RevOps. And the third one would be allowing your RevOps person to be pulled in 100 different directions. And basically, when you're a resource to everybody, you're a resource to nobody. Um, those are three like blatantly obvious ones to me that people screw up all the time.
You see this frequently?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I had this conversation yesterday where two different VPs of sales that I talked to are trying to get a RevOps resource for themselves, and they can't convince the founders of the need for it. And they're having to do RevOps work themselves, which they don't have an interest in doing. They're not any good at, and they're breaking stuff. And that causes them to not spend time in deals, closing business, or coaching their team, or working on strategic things, which is really what the job is all about.
Yeah, it's
And so,
interesting.
therefore, everybody's struggling.
So interesting. I wanted to see what the three most common things that you came across were, but I think we're pretty wrapped up on time here, Scott. I'm very grateful that you hopped on the show with me today. Thank you so much for being a part of this. I did want to say
You're
one last
welcome.
thing before we jumped. Go Eagles. Looks like you're a Bills fan. I don't know how accurate that may be, but
It's very accurate. My family's from Niagara Falls, Buffalo, New York.
well, if it means anything, I've got Josh Allen as my fantasy quarterback. But it's been a pleasure to
Good
have you
enough.
on here today. And thanks again. And we'll be hopefully in touch in the future. I'd love to stay connected and have a great rest of your day. And thanks for being on the show.
All right, Nick. Cheers, man. Thank you.